The camera saw them before I did. The lens sat behind a stack of art books on the console, a pinhole aimed at the glassy room that opened to Lake Washington. Gideon Crow lounged on our white sofa like he owned the angle of it. His beads clicked against his wrist. Sloane perched near him, hands folded like a woman who had practiced virtue in mirrors. Harper hovered, trying to make herself smaller and prettier at the same time. Dad stood a little apart, a sweat sheen on his temple despite the cool from the lake. Jasmine tea steamed on the slab table. The scent curled with the thin thread of incense Gideon had lit without asking. He watched me the way a cat watches a bird against a window. "Your daughter carries a heavy star," he told my father. His voice wore a velvet coat. "If she stays close, misfortune shortens the lives around her. There is a remedy, a talisman written with the right medium. Luck can be balanced." "Balanced," Dad repeated. His eyes flicked to me, then to Sloane's smooth face. He was the wealthiest man in the room. He looked like the poorest. "How much?" he said. 20, Gideon said. Not the word 1,000, only the shape of a mouth that had said it often. Dad nodded to the house accountant. A metal case arrived. Flat stacks of bills went down like bricks. Gideon's beads stilled. He took out paper that looked like clouds made solid and a brush. Sloane pricked her index finger with one of my sewing needles. A single drop of her blood budded and fell. Harper did the same, flinching with big eyes. Vermilion ink bloomed in a red vein that ran over the page. Gideon drew fast and graceful, the brush whispering. The lines looked like little staircases and birds. He said it had to be kept near my heart. He said distance from me was kindness. Sloane put the folded paper in a silk pouch and tied a red thread around it. Her smile at me bent with effort. "Maya, sweetie, keep this safe." "I will," I said. My stomach made a small private knot. Gideon stood, exaggerated a sigh, and swayed as if the act of drawing had hollowed him out. "I require a brief rest," he said, not to my father, but past him toward the hallway. A maid led him to the guest room that used to be my mother's painting studio. Before he disappeared, he touched the doorframe with the back of his fingers, as if listening to its grain. I took the silk pouch to my room and shut the door. My mirror over the desk had a perfect surface, a sheet of sky. I set the pouch down and untied it. The paper breathed a little when I unfolded it. I lifted it to my mouth and spit on the center. The wet dark ran in delicate legs through the ink. I picked up the little bottle of cinnabar I had bought with cash, not a card. The powder looked like ground brick. I touched the brush to the red, and I changed 3 strokes no one in the living room would have noticed. My thumb pressed down a wet stamp. The paper warmed under my skin. In the mirror, my face looked like mine. And then a sound under the glass. A sound like a hair catching against a comb. A crack stitched across the bottom edge, a thin white vein, the length of a thumbnail. It felt like something inside the house had shifted a fraction. I slid the talisman into my bra where a fossil of old fear still lived. The phone beside me buzzed with a silent push. I opened the app. The guest room filled my screen. Gideon's shoes lay by the bed, too close to Sloane's. Their arms were a knot. Fabric rasped. They breathed into each other, and in that breathing he promised beauty and luck, the way a salesman promises floors that will never scuff. "She has enough to feed 10 lives, he whispered. "You will glow." "What about my daughter?" Sloane whispered. "She will be a vision," he said. On the quilt beneath them, something like a little square of paper lay near the baseboard. My camera did not see his hand put it there. It saw the way he glanced at it, the way his shoulder shifted to block it. I recorded, I saved. I watched long enough to get bored with the sounds of people making the worst choices in the prettiest room. Harper found me later with her chin tucked and voice soft. "There is a school camping trip. Could I borrow something casual? I do not have many clothes, not like you." "You should buy your own," I said. I kept my tone gentle. "I will have the driver take you. I have a tutor coming." She glanced toward the guest hallway. "Can you come with me, Maya? The mall overwhelms me." I looked at her. It was true that she had grown up with less and wanted to never feel like that again. It was also true that pity is a key people like to press into your hand. I pulled out my phone and transferred $1,000. "Go with your mom. She was just on her way to see the guest." "Maybe ask her first." Her smile broke out smug and quick. She took the money, then ran upstairs. 2 minutes later, the house split with a scream that started human and ended animal. The lock I had accidentally loosened earlier gave easily. I kept the picture on my phone clean where I had touched the brass. I went to the study. The tutor taught me ways of arranging numbers so they obeyed without complaint. The quiet of concentration tasted like rain waiting on the lake. Sloane came to the door as if passing through a flame. Her mouth tried on a few shapes before it settled. "Did you see anything?" "I was with my tutor," I said, looking up with the eyes people bring to a piano recital. "Is something wrong?" "It is nothing," she said. She turned as if the air had teeth and went away. By evening, the household staff had changed like a deck shuffled hard. Faces I knew were gone. The new ones did not look at me when they passed with trays. The next day was Caleb Whitaker's birthday at the house next door, all white stone and blue hydrangeas. Sloane made desserts in our kitchen with sleeves pushed to her elbows. I stood beside her with my hair slicked back like a girl who wanted to be good. When I brushed her wrist to hand her the vanilla, her skin gave a small shiver that traveled up my arm like static. She baked bite cakes until the air was sugar and heat. We carried a tower of them to the Whitakers. Evelyn opened the door with earrings like rain. She smelled like citrus, hand cream, and lake air. The living room was full of parents in tidy shoes and kids in shirts that had seen only 1 hour of play. Caleb looked past me as if not seeing me would keep his world in place. Sloane smiled with a humble tilt. I did not know what to bring. I made these. I hope he likes them. Mrs. Quinn, I said, too soft for anyone but Evelyn. There was something on the back of Sloane's neck. Everyone turned. The skin below Sloane's hairline was flushed and blistered a red field in the shape of fingers. It had been there in our kitchen hidden. It looked rooted now. I took a step back, without thinking, hand to my mouth, tears ready in my eyes. Is that contagious? The air leaned away from her. The parents drifted back with polite horror. I heard someone ask in a voice that thought it was whispering if she used to work in a bar. The kids picked up the tone before the words. Harper arrived late, breathless, wrapped in a white dress that glowed too bright in daylight. The smell reached us before she did. A sour water stink clung to her despite whatever perfume she had poured over it. A little girl pinched her nose and said it was like something had died. Harper's face went gray. She handed Caleb a gift with shaking fingers. It is not the present, I said quickly and put my body between her and the worst angle of the room. She fell through a loose manhole cover yesterday. The smell did not let go. Kids squealed and scattered as if the word sewer was a spell. Sloane slapped Harper lightly in a gesture meant to be private and failed. Their exit was a scurry of humiliation. I stayed small and upright and apologized for their rudeness on behalf of my father. Evelyn squeezed my shoulder. When the cake was cut, Caleb tried to be kind to me for the first time. Pity rode the edges of his voice. It did not make him more interesting. Evelyn walked me home with Caleb because our houses are neighbors, and good fences do not always keep anything out. She was telling me about the ferry schedule when the front door opened from the inside and my father's hand found my cheek. The slap was a hard sound. The floor came up and then down again. The edge of the foyer table caught my forehead and opened a hot line above my brow. Evelyn moved without thinking. She shoved Dad back with the sharpness of a mother who had become a wall, her voice shredding as she called 911. The house held its breath. Somewhere behind us a tray rattled. Blood slid down the side of my face. I sat and let my body be small so the room could draw its conclusions. Evelyn told the police exactly what she had seen. Her words were precise. Dad's face collapsed and said again, a structure under earthquake. My phone trembled on the floor beside me. I lifted it and the screen bloomed with the guest room feed. The image froze for half a second, then moved. Gideon was alone now. He stood near the window with his back to the lake. In his hand, a square of paper, white as bone. He eased it under the crown molding and smoothed the edge with 2 fingers. For a breath, his face tilted to the lens as if he could feel the camera grazing the air. I pressed the volume down until the phone went silent. The dried blood itched at my hairline. The jasmine from yesterday had vanished. In its place was the faint, clean bite of ozone from the lake, like a storm pressing its palm against the glass. The officers were efficient and plain-voiced. They took statements in the front hall while the hydrangeas outside shook in a wind that smelled like metal rain. Evelyn spoke like a person who had been waiting for this script. My father listened to his own breath and the scrape of a pen on a citation, and he nodded. When the door closed, the quiet in the house sat like a person in a corner. He turned to me, eyes raw. The apology did not fit his mouth. He reached, then stopped as if he had learned that even air could bruise. I went to the sink, rinsed the blood from my hairline, and pressed a cold cloth to my brow. The jasmine from the day before had been chased out. Ozone lifted off the lake and touched the windows with a clean sting. School took me in with fluorescent light and pencil dust. Rainier prep smelled like disinfectant and gym floor. I slid into math as if into a stream that had always been waiting. The work clicked neat and tight. I opened my notebook, the one with a row of tiny diagrams on the sticky tabs. To anyone else, they were color codes for assignments. Under my finger, they hummed like a low wire. I passed a few to the study table without looking up. Where did you get those tabs? Neela whispered. Stationery store, I said. They help me track focus. You can have a set. By lunch, 3 kids had asked to join the after-school study hour. They were not the best students or the worst. They were the ones who knew they could be better and were tired of pretending not to care. I did not give them rules. I gave them a table tea from a thermos and silence that had a shape. Mr. Hargrove called me to the doorway after class. "Big jump, Maya. Keep it honest." He smiled with a kind of sadness adults think children cannot read. I smiled back. It was noisy at home. It is different now. Numbers help. Harper's transfer paperwork came through in a week. She walked into homeroom in a pale sweater and a look that wanted to turn the clock back on the party. The threshold of our classroom had a strip of raised wood older than the building. Her toe caught it. The fall was a clean forward pitch. Her chin hit first. When she looked up, a chip of white sat on the floor like a tooth that had lost its house. A couple of boys whistled because they did not know what else to do. The girls went still. I was first to reach her. Her breath smelled like mint and panic. "This class has a high bar," I said softly, helping her stand. "Standards, too." She cried without sound. The nurse took her to a dentist. By the time she came back, her smile looked like a patch job. The doctor's temporary resin was a different color than her enamel, a small flag she could not take down. That afternoon, she approached our table with a paper cup of cookies she had made herself. "I can bring snacks every day," she said. "I can help with worksheets. I want to be useful." Neela looked at me. The boys at the end pretended to read. I kept my voice even. "We have cooks at home. We also have homework that belongs to the person assigned it. Sit if you want to work. Otherwise, let us keep the hour quiet." Color rose under the foundation on her cheeks. She set the cookies down and left them. No one took one. Sugar turned stale in the air. At home, Sloane spent a lot of time on the sofa with her heels bare. She scratched her arches until the skin looked angry. The house smelled like medicated ointment and lemon cleaner. My father worked late with his assistant, a woman who wore simple shirts and easy hair. I sent Sloane 3 photos from a number that did not belong to me. A coffee shop table. 2 heads bent together. The angle was ambiguous enough to drive a person's thoughts into wrong corners. The blue-red receipt popped under my thumb. 10 seconds later, the screen lit again. "You little fox," she wrote to someone else. I could imagine the fury in her throat. She grabbed her keys and left a trail of perfume behind her that did not quite cover the ointment. Harper tried again with the Whitakers. She cornered me in the kitchen with a handmade scarf, pale gray and soft. "Could you take this to Caleb for me?" "You should give it to him yourself," I said. He asked if you were feeling better. The lie touched her like sunshine. She ran to Sloane's vanity and used half a bottle of foundation. The shade erased the last of her freckles and turned her features chalky. She stood in the doorway and waited for my verdict. "You look very pale," I said. "Wear the white dress, leave your hair down, it softens your angles." She put on the dress, then second-guessed the hair and scraped it into a tight tail. It left her ears exposed 2 small shells that told all her thoughts. Dusk pulled a navy wash over the lake. I watched from the far left window with the night vision binoculars my father kept by his sailing gear. The Whitakers' SUV turned into their drive. Headlights flashed across the hedge. Harper stepped from the shadow of the hydrangeas with the scarf in both hands. Evelyn came out first, then Caleb. The porch light sharpened everything. Evelyn started one hand to her chest as if the pale face in the white dress had come up from the bottom of the lake. Caleb's expression went from polite to guarded. "I made this," Harper said, voice small. She held out the scarf like a peace flag. The thick foundation had settled into the new crack in her front tooth, a dark line that read as dirt on film. The air shifted. Caleb took a step back. He did not touch the scarf. Another time he said, eyes cutting toward his mother. Harper froze. The wind lifted the scarf's fringe. She let it fall. The sound it made on the porch was too loud for cloth. Evelyn steered her gently to the gate with the kind of smile that is made for company in emergencies. Caleb went inside without turning. I lowered the binoculars. A fairy horn fell across the water in a long warning note. The first sprinkle of real rain found the glass. 3 days after the party, the house ran on different rhythms. New staff spoke in soft voices and looked through me. My father took meetings at the club. Sloane rehearsed contrition the way some people rehearse lines for dinner theater. She made another tower of desserts and left them untouched on the kitchen island. She stood too long at the window and pressed the sore place at the back of her neck. Harper wore a hoodie with the hood up and came down for ice only. Gideon returned to the living room without announcing himself. He moved the way rain moves on clear glass, smooth and titled. He took my hand as if I had offered it. "May I?" he said, already turning my palm upward. His finger traced the crease between life and head. Heat collected under my skin where he pressed. I made my breath slow and let thoughts scatter. He drew a small figure in invisible ink with his fingertip, then made a small sound, not surprise, not pleasure. "The talisman I gave you," he said. "Have you kept it close?" "Of course," I said. "May I see it?" I went upstairs. The talisman lay in my drawer with the silk pouch. I held it for a moment to feel what it would give me. The paper was a little limp from the damp patch on the wall. I let the edge touch that spot and let the moisture blur a corner. When I went back down, Gideon had made an island for himself in the room. The curtains were open to the lake gray on silver. "I am sorry," I said, handing it over. "It got wet near the window during the rain." He studied it with a calm that made me want to look at the carpet. His thumb moved once, testing the line of a stroke. He nodded and folded it neatly. "It is compromised," he said, kind as a surgeon. "I will prepare a stronger one. The currents in this house demand it." Sloane drifted in at the edge of that sentence, eyes, bright hands empty. Harper came behind her like a shadow with a ponytail. Gideon took out a fresh sheet and placed it on the table. He pricked Sloane's finger without asking and let a ruby dot fall. He did the same to Harper. They watched him as if he were doing something merciful. Then he pricked his own thumb and marked the third point. The smell of the ink rose mineral and metallic. His brush moved quickly. The lines were duller than the first version, thicker, heavier. He made a second sheet and a third, his wrists loose, his face absorbed. He told Sloane to hold the edges flat. He told Harper to breathe slowly. "Luck is a river that can be guided," he said, voice soft, so it would feel private and profound. "We are only redirecting what would be wasted." In the hallway, the floor creaked as if the house disapproved. My father stood in the archway watching nothing with his hands in his pockets. He had learned to look at a scene and see a different one. Gideon lifted the completed sheet. "This must be kept very close," he said to me. "Inside your clothing. Do not let it touch sunlight." I nodded and tucked the folded paper at my hip. The brush lay on the table, its bristles stained a tired red. He turned away, already thinking of the next mark he would make. Sloane stood very still with triumph half-baked on her face. Harper held her bandaged finger to her mouth and breathed like a person at a doctor's office, pretending the needle had not hurt. Upstairs, the bathroom mirror waited with patient glass. I washed my hands until the water ran clear, then looked up. The crack from before sat where it had been a pale vein near the bottom. Another hairline split had appeared thin and sure, rising from the first one toward the corner. From where I stood, it made the shape of an eye if an eye had been drawn by a child. The light hummed. Ozone laid a clean line across my tongue. I reached out and touched the glass. It was cool and smooth, then it was a little warmer where my finger rested, as if the house had moved again inside its bones. The red bracelet on my wrist caught the light and looked for a second like a nervous pulse. The mirror cooled under my finger. The second crack lifted the light like a white seam. I let the room settle, then changed into jeans and a hoodie, and told the housekeeper I was going to the library. She nodded without looking up from the fruit she was rinsing. The knife tapped the sink in a calm rhythm. The bus smelled like wet wool and old coins. It carried me across the bridge past the ship canal with its gates that keep water obedient, then toward the foothills where the city thins and furniture stores give way to trees. I got off near a trailhead with a notice board and a map gone pale from sun. Dirt held the shapes of mountain bike tires and deer hooves. The air tasted like cedar and cold iron. Each step up the path made the city fall out of my pockets. Cedar Ridge did not have a sign. It had a wooden gate with a rope loop and a bell no one rang. The retreat sat back from the path, a low lodge with wide eaves and windows that reflected only trees. Water sounded somewhere to the left, not a creek, more like a pipe that had been made to sing. I stood and let my breath match the sound. She opened the door before I knocked. Dr. Eliza Wynne wore a plain sweater and jeans. Her hair was tied at the nape of her neck with a piece of red string, not for style, but as if hair could be bound to keep it from wandering off. Her face was not young and not old. It was the calm that comes from having watched storms count themselves out. "You came," she said. Her voice made the wood walls feel less rigid. "This time you found me earlier." I nodded. "I am not strong enough. He will see it." "He sees what he wants," she said. "He believes he is the only one looking." She gestured me inside. The lobby smelled like polished wood and tea. Someone had left a book open on a chair with a sprig of fir as a marker. We sat by the window where the light makes dust look like a soft weather system. I told her about the mirror and the talisman and the way Gideon drew with speed that looked like kindness. I told her about Sloane's neck and Harper's tooth and the smell of the room where lies had multiplied. I did not say I was afraid. I placed the fear in the way I held my hands so she could read it without having to hear the word. "Your house is full of marks," she said. "They are not all on paper." I looked at her wrist. She wore a bracelet of red thread, 3 strands twisted. One of the strands had frayed. She saw me see it and smiled at the tiny betrayal of fiber. Time is greedy, she said. So is he. You cannot leave this place, I said, because the thought had arrived already formed in my mouth. She nodded. The mountain gives me enough. If I go beyond the ridge, it stops. He took more than luck. He took what carried me forward. He is your husband, I said. The word felt unfinished in the air like a knot with a tail sticking out. Was, she said. She poured tea and let the steam rise between us like a curtain that both reveals and hides. He loved being the student who would outrun the teacher. He learned to pull thread from one life and sew it into another. It worked until the cloth of his own life began to rot. Can we cut his thread? I asked. We can cut what he tied to you. The rest is his to answer. She set her cup down and reached for my bracelet. She turned it once, then twice. You know what to do. You just forgot to act like a child long enough to be underestimated. I told her my thought. Not the steps one by one, the shape of it. The trap that is not a trap if the person believes he is walking into a gift. Her eyes narrowed with approval that did not rise to a smile. Yes, she said. Make certain the paperwork moves as cleanly as the video. Some doors open for shame, some open for stamps. She untied her red thread and retied mine. One knot, a second, a third. The last one set against my pulse with a small press that felt like a vow. You have enough for both of us, she said, and this time she did smile, brief and unguarded. On the way down the trail, the light shifted green and darker green. My shoes found mud and did not avoid it. I let dirt climb my calves. At the bottom, the wind carried a taste of rain and a hint of metal. The bus back was quiet except for the clicking of a man's thumb against the back of his phone. I did not look at the screen. I cut through a pocket of woods before the road to our street. The ground held yesterday's prints and new ones. My foot slid and I went down on my hands. My palms burned and the wet seeped up my sleeves. I did not rush to brush myself off. I wanted the house to think the world was doing what Gideon said it would do. Sloane met me at the door. Her eyes cataloged the mud with the satisfaction of a person who believes a puzzle has become simple. What happened to you? Flat ground, I said. I fell. She hid a pleased breath and shoved it down under concern. Go wash, she said. I will make dinner. Your father is coming home early. She was not used to making dinner. The burner hissed under her pan. Oil popped and caught her wrist. She hissed back and knocked the spoon. A line of red drew itself across the inside of her forearm. She held it under cold water until the skin blanched and then bloomed again. The kitchen smelled like sugar from the desserts that no one had eaten and the unmistakable salt of skin under heat. Harper came down with her hood up and her hands in her pockets. The pimples on her cheeks had swollen and then burst. She had tried to hide them with powder that turned the edges a different color than the centers. Her eyes were small and bright with pain. She did not speak. Sloane's phone lit the counter. Gideon. The name slid across the glass white on black, as elegant as a threat. She answered with her back to me. She did not whisper. It is worse, she said. For both of us. He was at the house in under an hour. He moved even more softly than before. The rain had started and dulled his shine. He went straight to the guest room without waiting for anyone to tell him where to go. Sloane followed. Harper hovered in the hallway and pressed her hand to the place above her mouth, as if she could hold her face together with her palm. I took the burner phone from my desk drawer. It was the cheap kind that feels like a toy until it changes a life. I scrolled to the video, the living room scene with the quilt and the way the camera caught his hand near the molding. I added the date and the timestamp that matched the other clip. Then I typed to my father with my other hand on my real phone. 2 sentences, simple. They are in your room now. Check the guest feed. I placed a camera in the corner of the hall at knee-height cable tucked under the baseboard. The carpet gave under my palms. I could feel the wood like a sleeping animal. I set a second camera on the newel post pointed at the top of the stairs. The house breathed around me. It had learned my weight. Robert's car hit the gravel with a sound that made the windows vibrate. The front door opened too hard and caught on the rug. He took the stairs 2 at a time with 2 security men on his back, like ghosts that wear boots. Harper stood as if to intercept him. I stepped in front of her and covered her mouth gently with my hand. Her skin was hot. One sound I said into her ear, quiet as a prayer, and everything on your face will open again. She nodded, stiff and small tears burning through the powder. Upstairs, the door gave the way soft wood gives to a hard shoulder. There were voices that were not words, and then words that sounded like furniture thrown down a flight of steps. The guards did not need orders once they saw. Shoes scuffed, a drawer slid. Sloane cried that it was not what it looked like. Gideon spoke with civility that belongs to people who have never been caught. He did not raise his voice. They came down in pieces. Sloane wrapped in a robe hair out of the neat line she liked. Gideon with his collar crooked and his handcuffed wrists, making an argument that his mouth could not win. My father's face was a color that does not have a name because people avoid having to use it. He told the guards to hold them there. He told the house manager to call the police. The manager had already dialed. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and did not look away. Sloane saw me and swallowed a word that would have been a weapon if she had been alone with it. Harper slid down the wall and made a small keening sound. The cameras caught all of it. They did not blink. In my room, the light from the desk lamp made a round country on the wood. I opened my laptop. I imported the new footage and placed it beside the old. The timeline formed itself into a clean chain. Faces, dates, the square of paper by the baseboard, where a person with sharp eyes could not fail to notice. I typed their names under the thumbnails. I set the privacy to public. I clicked upload. The progress bar moved with a steady patience. 30%, 50%. The rain on the window found a rhythm like breathing. A fairy horn called from the dark water. In the bathroom, the mirror added a third hairline crack that met the other two and made a shape like a net. The red thread on my wrist tugged once under its knot and held. The upload beat past 90%. In the hall, voices tangled. I closed the laptop and stepped out. The living room had the color of storm glass. The guards held their line. My father pointed at Gideon with a hand that shook. Sloane stood to the side in a robe that wanted to look expensive and only looked small. Gideon moved first. He slipped past the guard on his right and plucked a roll of paper from his coat. It unfurled with a whisper. Symbols climbed the page like ladders. He palmed paste and pressed the sheet to the archway. The room took a breath that did not belong to lungs. A windfall charm, he said, voice low and gentle. 3 days. I saw the slant of the strokes. I smelled the tin of the ink. The lines had a hungry tilt. Stop, I said. That buys money with life. My father flinched. The guard to his left lifted a hand as if touch could remove the mark. Gideon reached for a second sheet. Do not, I said louder. You die after it pays. The words landed like plates shattering on tile. My father looked at the paper as if it might answer him by itself. He stepped forward and tore it free. The paste held for a breath and let go. The paper folded against his fist like a living thing trying to keep its spine. He dropped it to the floor. The guard stomped it flat. Gideon's face changed and then reset. He smiled with all the teeth he had. Misunderstandings are common with old forms, he said. Let me correct. Get out of my house, my father said. The words sounded like they had been waiting for a year to be said. The house manager announced the police at the gate. Sloane lifted her chin and tried a different mask. She moved toward my father with palms up. Robert, please, it was not like that. He did not look at her. He turned to me, took in my split brow and the bracelet on my wrist. He nodded once as if we had agreed to something without speaking. I went upstairs and closed my door. The room held its own weather, clear and cold. I set my phone on speaker and called the number I had written on a sticky note and slid behind my bookshelf. The lawyer answered on the second ring. His voice was compressed and fast, like a car in the left lane. I said my name. I said I needed to file immediately for a client who could not be present. I said the words that open legal doors. Irreconcilable differences. Fault-based dissolution. Evidence with timestamps. A named third party. I transferred the retainer. The sound of keys followed a clean staccato. Send the file now, he said. We can clock it tonight. I pushed the clips through the pipeline from the burner to the secure link he sent. Names, dates, angles. The sheet of paper at the baseboard. The finger near the molding. The old wedding record for Eliza Wynn and Gideon Crow from a county page that still believes the internet is a bulletin board. Received, he said. I will have the petition stamped. I ended the call and sat for a minute without moving. The mirror in the bathroom added a thin new line that met the others like a hand finding another hand. Water ran in the pipes. The thread on my wrist pressed against my skin. Downstairs, officers moved through the rooms with quiet professionalism. They took statements. They accepted the device with the recordings from the manager who held it like a fragile organ. They asked my father if he wanted to press charges for assault and trespass. He said yes. They suggested a temporary protection order. He said yes again. Sloane tried to cry into his shoulder and found only fabric. Harper shook beside the staircase, eyes swollen, mouth raw at the edges. Gideon watched everything as if he were considering a restaurant with a menu he had already memorized. When the officer stepped closer, he lifted his cuffed wrists with a little flourish. On the way out, he brushed the doorway with the back of his fingers again, listening to the wood with his skin. They put him in a car. The rain turned the driveway into a mirror that showed clouds and gravel as if the earth had flipped and changed its mind. I stood under the overhang and breathed the ozone to rinse the leftover mint of fear from my mouth. Night folded around the house. The officers left. The staff shut the doors and turned off lights one by one. My father sat at the dining table with a glass of water and nothing else. He looked at the glass like it might look back. He nodded once more without looking at me, then went upstairs to a room that no longer knew how to be ours. An hour later, the gate camera flashed. Gideon had not gone to a station. Process had taken a turn in a quiet hallway. He reappeared in our drive as if the night had breathed him out. He walked back into the house without permission, flanked by a new softness in the guard's stance that told me he had spoken somewhere else to someone we did not see. He moved like a doctor making rounds. He set new sheets on different thresholds. He pressed corners with precise fingers. He spoke to my father about a contract landing a vendor folding into our company, a windfall that would come like weather. My father stood and listened and did not look at me. I stepped between Gideon and the next doorway. The paper in his hand was heavier than before. The ink had a darker shine. "You do not get to do that here," I said. He smiled at me as if I had asked for a bedtime story. He tipped his head. "The currents are strong in this house," he said. "They will carry you if you let them." Foom. "The last one would have carried a body," I said. "Mine or his." He studied my face as if comparing it to a photograph taken yesterday. He took a half step closer. The air around him felt like a mirror that had been polished too hard. My father chose that moment to become audible again. His voice came from behind me flat and hard. "If I'm not very rich in 3 days, you will suffer. If this goes public, you will have nowhere to hide." Gideon did not look at him. He looked at me and pressed his tongue against his molars, a small habit that made his cheek move. He lowered the paper. He tucked it against his chest like a thing worth carrying. Then he walked out without turning his back to us each step, even as if he were moving through lines he had drawn on the floor. When he was gone, the house let out a breath. The quiet broadened. I went to my room and opened my laptop. The lawyer's email sat at the top of the inbox, a copy of the petition, a stamp from the clerk, case number assigned, Eliza's name where it should be, Gideon's name where it needed to sit forever. Something shifted as I read the line with the date. The bracelet on my wrist tightened under its own knot. A thin heat rose along the inside of my forearm and then paused. Gideon arrived at Cedar Ridge just after midnight. The retreat's motion light caught him and made his face too bright in the dark. He knocked once and then stood very still, as if stillness could make the camera forget him. Eliza opened the door and held it without stepping aside. Her red string had been retied with fresh ends. She looked smaller and more solid at the same time. "Junior sister," he said, as if the years had not gone through us. "My luck is broken. They will hurt me." "That belongs to them," she said, "and to you." He dropped to his knees. It was not theatrical. It was the gravity of a body missing its thread. He touched his forehead to the threshold. "Undo the counter," he said. "Please." Eliza's eyes went to the dark behind him where the trees held a different black. She looked back at him, and in that look was a ledger closing. "No," she said. He lunged not at her, but toward the warm light of the lodge. 2 men stepped from the shadows on either side. They were ours. They did not have to use much force. He had already spent himself. They lifted him under the arms and carried him toward the gravel. His shoes scraped. He did not curse. He made a sound that was smaller than anger and larger than pain. I stood a little behind Eliza and to the left. The porch boards were damp under my shoes. The rain came in a straight fall that made curtains in the air. The smell of it was clean and electric. Eliza's hand found mine for a breath and let go. At the far edge of the lot, his car waited like a promise he had written to himself. The men placed him in the driver's seat and shut the door. The engine turned over with a cough. Headlights cut the rain into strips. He pulled out as if he trusted roads more than he trusted people. On the way down the mountain, the curve after the weather station holds its own cold longer than the rest of the asphalt. His tires met it the way a foot meets marbles on a hardwood floor. The rear fishtailed. The brake lights flared red on wet rock. The wheels spun in his hands. The car crossed the line and took the guardrail with it for 3 posts, then found the only tree that stood close enough to be chosen. Metal made a sound like a door collapsing into a throat. The night went very quiet. Rain threaded itself through branches. In the beam of the wreck's one live headlight, a strand of red string lifted from the crack of the hood and caught on the wiper. It clung there and shivered a thin line between the glass and the rain, then unspooled and slid down out of sight. The light flickered once. The engine clicked as it cooled. The smell was coolant and sap, and the faint, clean bite of ozone that comes after something breaks open. Rain stayed. It softened the lawn and made the hydrangeas sag. The air over the lake lost its bite and kept the clean taste of metal. In the morning, I walked to the end of the dock with a towel around my shoulders and watched a ferry move like a white thought across the water. When I looked down, the lake reflected a sky that finally wanted to look back. At Cedar Ridge, the roof carried beads of water that did not hurry. Eliza held the door open with her shoulder while she shook a wool throw by the railing. The motion light clicked off even though she was there. She smiled at the small fault in the wiring, like it was a joke the building insisted on telling. "They called," I said. "I know," she said. She had made tea. We stood just inside the doorway and let the steam draw a line that seemed to stitch the room to the rain. The mountain sounds different today. We listened. The water pipe to the left kept its song. A second sound threaded under it a lower tone that had not been there before. It felt like floorboards settling in a house after a crowd leaves. On the way back to the city, clouds thinned and showed a strip of pale blue. The bridge smelled like wet steel in winter. The email from the clerk sat in my inbox by the time I reached our driveway. The attachment held Eliza's name printed under the word dissolved. The stamp looked like a small sun that had decided to be square. Inside the house, boxes had appeared along the wall by the stairs. Sloane packed in a careful rush. She folded dresses that had never met weather and slid them into tissue. She wore a brace on her wrist from the kitchen burn. When she moved her head, the healed skin at the nape bent in a way that showed how it had mended. The room kept a space around her without being asked. "You cannot be serious," she said to my father. "I made this home live." "You made it something," he said. His voice had lost the wobble it wore the night he hit me. He sounded tired and precise. He handed her a folder with an agreement and a new set of numbers. "You have a place downtown for 6 months. After that, you figure it out." Her mouth found a shape that could have been grace if she had practiced longer. She nodded because the terms matched reality. The credit cards came back from the study cut in thirds. The sound of the shears was small and clean. A week later, she crossed a midtown sidewalk in a rain that had taken a day off. She held a bag with a loaf of bread and a lemon. A buzz from above drew all the heads on the block up. Someone had left a tool on a ledge where wind does not forgive. It dropped without drama and struck her shoulder hard enough to unthread a nerve. She sat down with the calm of a person who knows that standing will be late. The bread stayed whole. The lemon rolled and stopped at a curb. The city came to get her with a siren that was mostly air. Harper did not return to class. The dean's office sent a letter that used words like policy and environment. It had a signature in blue ink that tried to be warm. I saw her once at the edge of the field where runners cut a path. She watched from behind the fence with her hood up and her hands in the pocket of a sweatshirt she had borrowed from a cousin. The wind lifted her hair. The skin around her mouth had healed in a way that looked tight. When she met my eyes, she did not recognize me, or she pretended not to, which is sometimes the same thing. The house on the lake took a new angle. My father's meetings moved from rage to logistics. He drank water and slept on time. He stopped looking past me when he spoke. At breakfast, he said, "Do you need the car?" as if that were a language he had always spoken. I said I am walking because the rain had taught me that the streets beneath trees sound different than the ones beneath wires. The study table at school grew by 3 chairs. Neela drew a mind map with colors that kept their promises. Jonah brought a thermos of barley tea that smelled like cereal and earth. We took a quiz and the numbers felt like the quiet inside a library after closing. Mr. Hargrove wrote a small note on my paper and underlined the word steady. Caleb found me at the fence between our yards. The boxwood there stays trimmed without needing attention. He stepped through the gate with his hands empty. "I misread you," he said. He looked at the lake because my face did not offer an easier view. "I like how you do things." "I do them how I can," I said. The words carried a weight that stopped him from trying to add glitter. He nodded. His shoulders relaxed the way shoulders do when they accept the idea of being friends. Evelyn waved from their patio and brought over a plate of orange slices dusted with chili salt. She pressed one into my hand and squeezed my fingers like a person passing a cotton ball to someone who just had blood drawn. In the afternoon, I drove to a clinic that had been a dry cleaner in a different decade. The paint on the sign out front still showed a ghost of shirts that had once been sketched in blue. The waiting room smelled like bleach and coffee. A toddler in rubber boots clapped at the fish painted on the floor. A woman at the counter asked for help, paying for a prescription like she was asking for a cup of sugar. Harper sat in a chair near the window. She had lost weight that had never been hers to spare. The hoodie hung on her. The skin on her hands had split around the knuckles and healed and split again. She watched my reflection in the glass first, then turned to me with a small start. Everything goes wrong, she said. It came out too flat to be complaint and too soft to be a plea. Even when I do nothing, my skin, jobs, doors. I sat. The chairs were molded plastic and made a sound like a negative when you shift. I folded my hands and let the bracelet on my wrist be visible. The red had faded to a soft brick. There was a time, I said, when you and your mother worked with someone who takes thread from other people and uses it until it breaks in his own hands. I kept my voice low. The television at the corner was playing a soap with the sound off. A doctor hugged someone in a corridor that had no patients. I do not remember, she said. Her eyes went wide like a child's at bedtime. She swallowed and touched her throat. I remember being cold in a house where the heat was on. I remember smelling like pennies. You were not an architect of it, I said. You were a room it happened in. She blinked. The sentence found a place. Her cheeks flushed the way skin does when it wants to be hot and cannot decide how. She stood, then sat back down. She reached for my sleeve with fingers that were almost steady. It feels like you took something, she said. From me, from my mother. The words could have been claws. They were only small stones in a pocket. I shook my head. It was already mine. Her breath hitched. She rose too fast, and the chair skidded. The toddler in boots laughed at the noise. Harper took a step forward, then stopped herself. 2 security volunteers appeared from the hallway, careful and slow. They did not touch her. They were ready if she asked for help without asking. She looked at them, then at me, and her face went empty in a way that means a person is tired in their bones. The clinic doctor came with a clipboard. She spoke with a calm that fit the room. Harper signed forms with a hand that made the letters take the long way to the end of the line. The volunteers walked with her to the back. The door closed with a sound that promised it could open again, and maybe it would. I drove up to Cedar Ridge with a box of groceries that a co-op labels with cursive. The smell of the apples crowded the car. The road was dry and the guardrail had a new section that shone. At the retreat, the motion light behaved. Eliza was mending a blanket with a thread she had dyed herself. It matched the wool too well to see unless you wanted to. I brought coffee and bread, I said. You brought weather, she said. Her eyes creased at the corners, the kind that stays. We sat on the wide step and watched fog sit in the trees like an animal considering whether to sleep. I took the red thread from my wrist. The knot was tight. I loosened it with my teeth and rolled it into a small coil. I tied a new thread around her wrist, not the same thickness, thinner, stronger. 3 knots pressed down with a finger's worth of certainty. For you, I said. For you, she said, and tied a second thread on mine. The color was not the same red as before. It had more brown in it, more earth than heat. Back in my room, the air had settled. The bathroom mirror had held onto its cracks and made no new ones. I took it off the wall. The screws protested a little and then surrendered. I slid the mirror into a blanket and carried it out to the garage. A new mirror waited in a crate wrapped in thin foam and tape that clung. I lifted it to the bracket and tightened the screws until the glass sat clean and straight. I opened the app on my phone that had been my first window into my own house. I scrolled through feeds, guest room, hall, stair cam. I selected them and hit remove. The app asked if I was sure. I said I was. The blank gray squares felt like sheets shaken and folded. Evening came. The lake took the color of slate and then darker. A fairy horn drifted over the water with its 2 long notes and 1 short. In the kitchen, the dishwasher clicked. Somewhere a drawer closed. I stood at the bathroom sink and watched my breath leave and fade from the new mirror. The surface stayed whole. The room smelled like soap and a little like ozone, which was fine. It means the air remembers rain. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.